Hello again, friends. Stephen on Monday, as we said before. Today it's Manny on Monday. As a matter of fact, it's going to be Truth on Tuesday very shortly. Anyway, please, I apologize for those of you who like to keep a tight schedule. Sometimes I just have so much on my plate. Anyway, guys, today you can see the title, Flawed Laws and Compromised Courts. What's the solution? Now, part of what I want to talk about today is a creation here in Ireland called the People's Tribunal, the People's Tribunal of Ireland. And I'll explain why as best I can. This will be a sort of, when I say a two-part explanation, today I'm going to explain how and why the People's Tribunal was set up and the pillars of it, if you like, and the reasoning behind it, and how anybody in any community can use this system. Now, there's a little bit to learn, not an awful lot. It's a relatively simple system, nothing like the way the Irish courts work. As a matter of fact, it's almost completely the opposite, which is what makes it so attractive. Excuse me. So, and then perhaps next weekend, the intention is then to explain in a bit more detail what the process is so that you can all get a grasp of it. And then if all goes well or all goes according to plan, we'll be holding a hearing on the 31st of May, which is a Saturday. What was it, 12 days away or something? And there will be some seats. We'll talk about that in a few moments. So let's get to the slides then. And again, what we do is generally talk about current events. In this particular case, guys, less on the international news and so on because of this tribunal hearing coming up, and more to try to educate the general public about the problems and the solutions, some possible solutions with the Irish courts. So we start off here. Obviously, I'll bring this one up for you, a little bit bigger. Okay, now, here you see on the right-hand side, this is Moses with the 10 Commandments the first time round. He had to go back up and do them again because he went up the mountain for 40 days. If you know your scriptures. And while he was gone, the chosen people all reverted to idolatry because their leader was gone for a while. So it's quite interesting, really, because Moses, of course, was in the position of being directly in contact with God. And that was what gave him his authority. But as Jesus even said, and don't worry, it's not going to be a religious lecture today or anything like that, guys. But as Jesus said to the Pharisees and the scribes when they were trying to trick him about the law, and they said, "Oh, Moses let us get divorced, so why are you saying that it's not, that's not right?" And he said, "You were given the law because basically you were too stupid." All right, I've forgotten the exact phrase he used, but what he was saying to them was, we had to write the law down. We had to put it down in stone because you'd lost and forgotten your connection to the divine, the ultimate original authority. That's what the logo top right is there. That's the original principle. That's the deity, the feminine and the masculine in that order. Spirit, mind, body, concept, plan, and action, and so on and so forth. It aligns with the properties of light, with subatomic physics, particles, electromagnetic spectrum, the whole lot. Okay, so but anyway, back to this, because before we start trying to work out what is the problem with law, particularly here in Ireland, and we'll go back to the slide a bit closer in a moment, but I just want to make this this point quite clear. Let's see. No, we'll leave it sitting up there. We'll leave the slide sitting there. Because we've had so many problems with the legal profession and the courts, and by this, what I'm saying is, first of all, it's incredibly convoluted, it's very complicated. Most lay litigants haven't got a clue what's going on. Ordinary people going into the courts, they're bamboozled, they're overwhelmed. Some of it is incidental, and some of it is deliberate. Okay, as a matter of fact, more of it is deliberate than you would realize. In other words, the franchise, the clique of lawyers, solicitors, barristers, judges, court service staff, agencies of the state, they've weaponized the law basically, and they're using it largely. Now, of course, there are occasional times where it's used properly and someone does something bad and they get correctly sanctioned or punished for it. And of course, got no problem with that. But it's morphed into something completely different. It's morphed into this monstrous, convoluted, tangled, indecipherable mess which absolutely suits the intentions of those who are profiteering from using and abusing the law. And this is, sadly, I'm sad to say, most of the people, certainly the ones I've encountered, that are involved in the higher echelons, large law firms, in the courts, almost all of the judges that I've come across have not been ethically or morally sound. Okay, sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. Most of the time, it's calculated what they do, and that's simply not the right sort of people we should have as judges. But there they are. So a lot of people started noticing. The point I'm trying to make here is that you'll meet people who are invested now in trying to find a solution as to the problems with the legal profession, the problems with the courts, the problems with abuse of authority and power. And bit by bit, in increments, people will move back through history. So we currently have the Irish Bunreacht on Éireann, which is the Irish Constitution of 1937. But there was a previous one that in certain elements challenges and contests the latter one. That was written in Irish back in, I think it was 1919, I think, yeah. And then prior to that, in Ireland, we had English common law. Prior to that, we had Irish Brehon law, right? And then you can trace, and then if you go back through English common law, you go back to the Magna Carta and so on and so forth. And incrementally, and I was part of this as well for a while. I listened carefully to the different arguments, and I hadn't yet worked out this business with Moses, because this was the first time that laws, certainly in Scripture, were written down. A set of laws. Here's 10 commandments. There's 10 laws. You are to obey them. Like I just explained a moment ago, why did they need to be written down at all? Why did they need to be put in this solid rock stone format so that there could be no doubt as to what was meant? Well, the reason was because after the proverbial fall, humanity was separated from the divine. Okay? So humanity is separated from the divine. So he had to sort out a chosen people, and then he would pick an elder within the chosen people. In this case, it was Moses. Moses would communicate directly with the divine, like we have in the logo top right there. Yeah. So Moses was that's why they didn't have kings until much later on in their history. And that's another story for another day. They didn't have kings. They had prophets and judges. Those were the leaders of the chosen people at the time, all right? And they had this direct connection to the deity, or at least as close as they could get, certainly better than everyone else. And accordingly, they would inform the chosen people what they should and shouldn't do. In this case, Moses is up the mountain, chatting away with God, the burning bush, all that sort of stuff. And he's told, carve these commandments and go back down and give them to the people. But by the time he gets down to the bottom, they're all dancing and fornicating and worshipping a golden calf and stuff like that. All right. It's really quite an important point, guys, to understand this. So he has to go back up and carve them all over again. All right. And they become a very precious element, the 10 commandments. And you can argue those are good, solid social rules. And if everybody abided by the spirit of those rules, we wouldn't actually need any other laws, would we? No, probably not. Maybe speeding laws and stuff like that, because vehicles aren't included in the 10 commandments, But love thy neighbor as thyself, do good unto others, as Jesus said, So if everybody had that attitude, we wouldn't need all of these laws. We wouldn't need all of these authorities and police and courts and prisons and enforcement agencies. Now, I know, obviously, at the moment, there's sufficient disruption in society and crime that, yes, there's a very strong case that we need some sort of governing bodies, we need some sort of police, we need some sort of court system, of course, all right? But I'm talking here about it having gotten out of control, how most of the people in the senior positions of these agencies now, law agencies and everything, are actually sociopaths. And we talk about this nearly every week, sociopaths and psychopaths, all right? They don't care about people. Their agenda is different. And when you don't care about people, you're absent the divine aspect of compassion and wisdom. It doesn't manifest in you properly, okay? And people like that, in my opinion anyway, should not be anywhere near a judge's bench unless they're on their way to jail. Yeah. Anyway, let's get to the point I'm trying to make. So the point I'm trying to make is that society obviously has got loads of problems, but if we can imagine for a minute, well, how would society be if it didn't have all these problems? And, we talk about, oh, no, I was going to say euphoria, not euphoria, utopia. That's it. We talk about utopia, this magical place where everything's wonderful and perfect, and the lions are going around kissing the bunny rabbits, and, everyone's cuddling and picking daisies, sort of thing. No, I'm more interested in imagining what Eden might have been like, the Garden of Eden, and what the kingdom of heaven would be like, as opposed to the kingdom of hell, which I do say, and I know some people don't get it, they don't understand, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that we're actually living at the moment in the kingdom of hell. Not least of all, when Satan tempted Jesus and he says, I'll give you any kingdom you want if you just bow down and worship me, meaning who owns them all? Yeah. Also, the structures of human society are intrinsically diabolical. I cover this nearly every week, talking about the autocratic pyramids that require you to sell your soul, even just a little bit, in order to be part, to get your wage packet at the end of the week or to be part of the system. I'm not saying there's an easy way to escape this today at this point in time in history, but we're moving towards a point where we've at least got to start thinking about what that would be like. So there was a time before law. Right? There was also a time before religion with the Garden of Eden, because you don't need religion if you're talking to God directly. You don't need religion, not if you're there in his presence or her presence or their presence. Okay? It's logical. A lot of people haven't worked this out, though. So you start to imagine a society. Well, how could we have a society without laws? Wouldn't there be chaos, anarchy, everyone murdering everyone? Well, there might be if we're all still got fallen natures. We're all wicked, but imagine a society where people are good enough to be able to control themselves, right? Now, to make the point here, because we're already nearly a quarter way into this today, and it'll flow pretty quickly today, guys. The point I'm trying to make here is that this slide here is talking about the International Criminal Court, right? There's only one of them. And it's set itself up as an authority. And it's issued arrest warrants. Now, I've made this point before. I say, look, it's not actually about law. Like I say down there on the right, the law. It's the law. Oh dear, we must all obey. We must do it. No, Gandhi said it. You have a duty, or was it Martin Luther King? You have a duty to disobey unjust laws. It's a duty, a moral duty. Yeah. So the law is not the highest authority. God is, or ultimate goodness, or the source. Yeah, the best of humanity. That supersedes the law, and you've got to let that govern how you think and how you act. And when a law comes along and they say, "Oh, you've got to do this," well, if it's not morally right, like great admiration for Enoch Burke and the Burke family for what they've been doing, you say, "No, you put me in jail because you've got the manpower to do it. Steal my money out of my bank account because you've got the controls to do it. Harass and get me fired from my job." And harass me through the courts and torture me and vilify me in the press because you got the power to do it. But they don't have the right to do it. They don't have the moral right. But no doubt there's some law somewhere that allows them to do it because they create the laws, the cabal, the elites, the establishment, the people in power. And they're creating these laws largely to keep the rest of us subdued, under control. And so we never actually realize our true divine potential. Trust me, guys. Now, I'm not saying all of them know that that's what they're doing, but they're part of the system. It's a diabolical system. You can almost say it's come directly from the mind of the satanic archetype. It's about crushing human beings instead of liberating them. Okay? So the point I'm making here is this guy here, this Khan fella, I've forgotten his name already. Here, we'll see it in a moment. Right, this guy is the senior prosecutor for the International Criminal Court. And he went ahead and issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. Now, we're not going to discuss the ins and outs, the wheres, the whys, the withals of whether he should or should not have an arrest warrant issued against him, right? That's not the point here today. The point I'm trying to say is, look what Trump did, okay? Trump sanctioned this guy and anybody who worked with him. As a consequence, 6 of his co-prosecutors resigned because they were too scared of the sanctions. And the sanctions involve curtailing your travel, curtailing your finances and stuff like that. Because Trump supports Israel And the International Court in Brussels declared, basically, Netanyahu was a criminal and that they had a right to arrest him. And Trump, who is not a judge, now you've got to remember this, guys, and I hope I'm making this point pretty clear. Donald Trump, like him or hate him or whatever, he's not a judge. He's not the Supreme Court judge in America, even. All right. And even if he was, the International Criminal Court would claim to have jurisdiction over. Right. Okay. So how can he interfere in the International Criminal Court's decision? Because as this guy says, you'll see in a few minutes, we have to apply the law. Really, we have to apply the law. But you've got a problem, haven't you? Because Donald Trump can pull a few strings here and there. You've lost your passport. Microsoft apparently complied with Trump's sanctions and stopped this man being able to use his official email accounts. In other words, made it impossible for him to continue working. And as the slides show here, Trump sanctions on International Criminal Court prosecutor halt the tribunal's work, and the emails are blocked. Now, so these guys are supposedly in charge of the law. And then you find out, well, there's more here than meets the eye, because there he is, Prosecutor Karim Khan on leave amidst misconduct probe and Trump sanctions. So not only has Trump hit this guy who thinks that he has the right and the power and the authority to issue criminal arrest warrants against leaders of separate states, right? They're assuming the authority to do this. But Trump is showing them as, well, look, you can have all the authority you want to claim in the world, but you haven't got the power. And I've got more power than you have. So it makes a nonsense of this concept of, it's the law. I hope everyone's getting that point. Here at the bottom, sanctions an International Criminal Court prosecutor halt to work. Now, the other thing as well, you can see him there. He says, your man here, Khan, we need to apply the law, he said. But guess what? One of the reasons he stepped aside is because he is under investigation for alleged sexual misconduct. So he's been violating the law himself. Do you see how it all becomes a nonsense? All right. When you have lawbreakers in charge of administering the law, it becomes a farce. It's as simple as that. And in Ireland, almost the whole of our judicial cohort are, at least to my knowledge, and certainly I've seen it happen almost every time I've been in the courts, they are committing criminal actions inside their courts in the full knowledge that they're doing it, and they're getting away with it partly because of the ignorance of the people in front of them, partly because of the complicity of the court service, and so on and so forth. Now, this lady on the right is just a video there. I've snapped it up to quote what she said. Let me just pull this up a bit bigger. The United Nations rapporteur urges the European Union to use legal powers to protect the International Criminal Court from Trump, from the Trump sanctions. Now, again, I hope you're getting this, guys. To me, this is all patently ridiculous. Either the law is the law and we all, yes, sir, no, sir, and tick-tock, tick-tock. And there are credible, decent, honorable, wise and judicious people in charge of it, So too many stories like this, arrogant, senior so-called professionals in the legal profession and the courts who turned out to be absolute scamps and scallywags in private, But what's the point of having all this law if you've got a Trump or even, let's say, a Putin? I think they've issued one against him as well, haven't they? And he just says, stick it where the sun doesn't shine, basically, because I've got you and whose army, you might say to Putin. He said, yeah, me and this army, the Russian army. That's who's going to stop you implementing these International Criminal Court sanctions. So it's really all about power, friends. And I want us to hang on to that idea here for a moment. Let's keep going. Yes. Now this is just a little. Oh no. Sorry about this, my friends. I think what I'll do, I'll just switch out of the screen and I'll read this because it's clearly run off the end of the page. I'll see if I can get a better. Right. What I'll do is I'll just read this, guys. I'll come off the page just for a second and I'll read it straight off the slide. This is just a commentary I have to the people who are Trump bashing madly. Okay, I'll just read this text just straight through. It was a comment I did in response to some post I saw online where, anyway, here it goes. Trump takes on Big Pharma, noting the withering cascade of abuse being directed at Trump. And then I asked the question, are you part of that cacophony? Because if so, you are most definitely not on the side of good at this point in history. You are, in effect, on the side of Big Pharma and of corrupt politics, of unvetted mass migration that is raising fear and disruption in local communities and destroying Christian cultures. You are supporting eternal wars that kill thousands to line the pockets of corrupt politicians and their buddies in the military-industrial complex. If you are still attacking Trump, you are on the side of big centralized government that disempowers and disenfranchises ordinary people, steals their taxes, and shares the booty with their globalist puppet masters. If you are still attacking Trump, you are displaying an arguably inexcusable lack of understanding and insight into how the world really works. Either that, or you are for more mass control and financial slavery, instead of encouraging and supporting our individual sovereignty so that we can each more authoritatively take on more personal responsibility. There are less and less excuses for ignorance, friends. Get educated and become aware. And then bottom right, we have willful ignorance and endless laws become the replacement for self-education and self-restraint, because ignorance and laws, making laws, are easy. Okay, so I'll just come back to you now, guys, if I can. Let's see if I can do this without, here we are. Ah, yes, there we are. All right, guys. So again, the point we're going to make, I'm sorry about the text there. I do that sometimes by accident. There's a method I can fix it, and I don't see it, you see, until I bring it up here. So the point here is, the bottom right point, I'm saying whatever his faults and failings might be, Trump is absolutely, at the moment, a beacon, an anti-establishment beacon at this time in history. And I hope to God he can keep it up and maintain it. And that, but like I said in previous posts, a man who doesn't smoke, doesn't do drugs, doesn't drink, yeah, and has sworn fealty, if you like, to the Christian ethos, and sees himself in a role which you can't really argue with the possibility that he's in a divinely guided role. I'm not saying he's always following the guidance or adhering to it to its exact parameters. Who am I to judge, But the fact that he's in a very extremely important role, not only in the world today, but in history. And I think it's not accidental that 2030, the date for the planned Great Reset, this date they keep on about, it will be the 2000th year anniversary of the beginning of Christ's mission. All right. That's for another day, guys. There's a lot to understand in the symbolism. That's exactly the date. If you were the other guy with the old horns, that's exactly the date you would have to aim for to finish enslaving humanity and keeping them eternally out of reach of the divine. All right. And that's what it's all about, my friends. So now the next slides they're going to come to me as a surprise. Yeah. Now I want to talk briefly. How are we doing for time? All right, here we go, guys. There's a concept called the overriding objective. All right. Now this exists in English law. Without dragging this out too long and lengthy, the overriding objective states that court cases should be handled, those 3 points on the right, in a cost-effective, efficient, and fair manner. That's what all that text summarizes too, all right? Very simple. So keep the costs down as much as you can, make it as quick as possible, and be fair to the parties that are in the court. Now, we all know that courts can get very complex very quickly, all right? When we talk about the People's Tribunal, you'll see where this comes into play. That concept of the overriding objective not only does not exist in English law, although it should, because we share common law jurisdiction with the UK. Not only does it not exist, but ask anybody who's gone through the torturous proceedings in the courts here in Ireland. And Ireland's legal system arguably operates exactly the opposite to that. It is massively costly, and the lawyers and the judges, the court service staff, the whole system is designed to basically force the participants to keep paying through the nose and paying for legal advice and paying for documents to be stamped. And, it's so point number one, the Irish system works exactly the opposite way. We've heard cases of lawyers for two opposing parties. Actually, it was overheard once in the library. One barrister saying to the other, they were supposed to be opposing each other in the court. You pluck this one and I'll pluck that one. In other words, we'll squeeze as much money out of them as possible. Other reports suggest that solicitors and barristers collude when they're supposed to be opposing each other in court. They collude and deliberately, because they're managing all the paperwork and writing to each other, they collude to deliberately drag out the case, run it on, because they're making money out of it all the time. And most of those people like that don't have active consciences. Sociopaths, like I said, my friends. Okay. Now, point number two, efficient. The same thing goes, because they're dragged out, it's ridiculously complicated and convoluted trying to get a case through the Irish courts. All right. And absolutely, number three, it is not fair. All right. It is not a level playing field. When you have corrupt, politically appointed judges, and sadly, again, it's been my unfortunate experience to have run into far too many of them. I've dealt with about a third of the sitting judges. Might be a bit less than that now as they retire, but certainly I could have said that a couple of years back. I've dealt with about a third of the sitting judges in Ireland, and at the time there was only one that I thought was what I would describe as a decent man. Yeah, the rest of them were in various degrees, were deceitful. They were irascible. They were, they were bullies. They were clever, but clever in a devious way. And certainly the concept of fairness just wasn't on their radar at all. Okay, so because of this, we've got this big problem in Ireland. We don't have this overriding objective. It should obviously be part of the principles of law. But it's being completely ignored in Ireland, as are other things. So here we are. I just want to, again, I hope you find this. This is an anecdote, but I just want to explain to you again why we've had to create the People's Tribunal of Ireland and how we've done it, but why we've had to do it mainly. So, makey uppy laws. That's me writing that, okay? So this is the Houses of the Oireachtas Inquiries, Privileges and Procedures Act 2013. Okay, I don't want to do this now in a way that's going to be clear to everyone and they don't think it's going to get too boring. All right. When we first wrote this book, Criminality in the Irish Courts and the Absence of the Rule of Law, right? We'll see it again in a moment. It was written in the form of a report to the Houses of the Oireachtas in absolute frustration after years and years of being traipsed and trawled through the courts with all of this nefarious activity going on. And I do mean incredible. I'm not talking about, here a bit of a paperwork error here or a mistake or an oversight. No, I'm talking about outright criminal collusion going all the way to the Chief Justice himself. If you are involved in any case that might embarrass the state or hold, office holders to account or anything like that, they came after you, and they came after you with criminal intent. As a matter of fact, so one of the first things I write in the book is the legal definition. I'll actually read it out to you here. The legal definition, all right? It says, in their own words, criminal organization means a structured group, however organized, composed of 3 or more persons acting in concert, that has as its main purpose or activity the commission or facilitation of one or more serious offences in order to obtain, directly or indirectly, a financial or other material benefit, like promotion, maybe. Yeah, so I won't go on about it. But anyway, that's from the Criminal Justice Act. So I used their own definition of a criminal organization to prove that they actually are operating as a criminal organization. No, they don't like it. But I'm just going to show you an example. So we did this report, and it was headed slightly different because when you do a report like that, and I think you're going to be surprised what I'm about to show you here, friends. Yeah. This is a quote from the procedures. I'll blow it up in a second, guys. Just wait for a moment. I'll blow it up. As in, I don't mean exploded. I don't want anybody thinking I'm manhandling explosives now or anything. Yeah, so when you send a report, right, into the Houses of the Oireachtas, and what I was basically saying was, look, here's a list of 40 judges and another 20 or 30 senior civil servants and the like, who are all engaged in this collusive act of criminal activity, actions, criminal activity, interspersed at different levels and degrees. Now, the first problem I ran into was that when you send in a complaint like that to the Houses of Oireachtas, this is after going through all the courts, exhausting all domestic remedies, as they say, even going to the European courts and being blocked there as well by nefarious individuals, underhanded blockers, they call them, lawyers basically who are put in the position to make sure your applications and your complaints don't get through. They make up the laws, to do it. So anyway, one of the things here is if you're giving evidence or if you put a report in, you can't name or you can't even allude to who the person is. So, for example, you can't say, oh, the clerk of the Dáil did X, Y, and Z. Because, believe it or not, as I'm about to show you here, action to be taken where the good name of a person is directly impugned. This is their laws, guys, all right? Where during the course of the conduct of the Part 2 inquiry, that's an inquiry into misconduct, the chairman of the committee is of the opinion that the good name of a person is being or is likely to be directly impugned in contravention of the provisions of the Act by a witness or committee member. The chairman shall direct the witness or committee member, as the case may be, to cease giving the evidence or making the utterance concerned, or to not give the evidence or make the utterance concerned, and if paragraph such and such applies, direct that the allegation constituting such impugnment shall not be published. To put that in this is what you call legalese, convoluted language, often not punctuated properly because it can then be interpreted different ways. That's done purposely as well, guys, to keep you confused. So basically what they're really saying is, yeah, we're the committee here, the Oversight Committee on Justice and Law, Health, whatever it might be, education, and you've got an education-related complaint to send in, right? You're only allowed to send it in if you can somehow work out a way to make the complaint without identifying the person you're complaining about. Isn't that astonishing and ridiculous? And this is one of the reasons why I'm saying to people who have political aspirations, be careful what you hope for, because you might get yourself elected and you find yourself up in the Dáil, just like people like Claire Daly, McWallace, and others that have been outspoken up there. But there's all these stupid rules that tell them what they can and can't say. Then their time is limited, and if they traverse this law or these rules, they can be kicked out or suspended because they've got other making up laws and rules. So it's all designed to protect the so-called good names of criminal wrongdoers in the system. All right. So that's the first one. So basically they're saying you can give evidence, but you can't name who you're giving evidence about. Yeah, and it can't go on the record. It's totally ridiculous, guys. But this is your government. This is how they operate. Okay, and let's look at the next one, which I think you'll find even more entertaining. I've headed it here, Dáil Magic. Eventually, I kept sending this report in, as I said to you a few minutes ago. I kept sending it in, and first of all, the clerk, who I've forgotten his name now, the clerk of the committee, the Justice Committee, I pressed and eventually he responded. He said, "Oh yes, the committee studied your submission, my report, right, and concluded that no further action was required," or something, whatever it was at the time. Anyway, it was a weak, pathetic answer. And I came back to him. No, what I did, I went round the corner, so to speak, and I got the minutes of that particular meeting, only to discover that I was being blatantly lied to. The issue wasn't on the agenda. It was never raised. It was never discussed. An absolute black and white lie from the clerk to the Dáil, one of the most senior civil servants and public servants we have in the country, right? Just outright lying. Why? Because it was inconvenient. So then I said, I wrote back then to all of the TDs in the group, and I said, I now refuse to communicate with your clerk because he's a liar. And liars, I don't deal with them, right? He's lost his privileges. More of us should do this, guys. We should really be doing this all the time. So I'm not going to deal with him. So I'm going to deal directly with each of you TDs. And I got all of their email addresses, maybe about, let's say, less than a dozen of them anyway. And I sent the report directly to every single one of them. And I said, now I'm asking each one of you directly to put this on the agenda and discuss it at your next committee meeting. And this is what they came up with, my friends. This is a rule, believe it or not, sitting up there on the Dáil. It's all a great lie, my friends, all right? I say Dáil magic. It's not magic, of course, more like black magic, okay? Privilege and immunity of committees and members of houses and restriction of evidence of certain persons, etc., right? A document given to a committee, so like my report, okay? A document given to a committee by a person who is not a committee member, such as me, shall cease to be a document of the committee under subsection 2A if the committee so decides. Do you understand what they're saying here, friends? They're saying basically, if you send something into us that's too hard to deal with, because I did, I worded it all, I took the names of everybody out of it, I had charts and graphs, described their positions loosely so they couldn't be identified, and eventually then I was going to produce the list, which is in the book itself. The whole list is in there, and their photographs, their names, their details, the whole lot, okay? These guys basically sat around a table and said, this report is too hard to deal with. We can decide as a committee that it has ceased to exist as a document before the committee. It doesn't exist. And guess what the response came back from the clerk is the clerk wrote back to me, cheeky so-and-so, because I told him I don't want to deal with you anymore. What can you do, though? And he writes back to me and he says, under section 8.4, whatever it was, part 8.4 or whatever of the Act, your documents, your report, have ceased to be a document in front of the committee. Therefore, there's nothing to talk about. And believe it or not, that's how that attempt to get this dealt with by the authorities ended. So I went ahead and published it and called their bluff. And of the 100 people named in there, most of them work for the state, 40 judges, 50-odd senior civil servants, even Taoiseachs and things like that. And then a handful of other people, a few guards, prosecutors and stuff. Not one of them ever came after me for what was written in there because, number one, they knew it was true. And number two, they dare not draw attention to a book that proves we've got a criminal organization up there and not the courts. So, what was next? Yes, I want to highlight this. This is Dr. Marcus de Brun. I'll just read this for you guys. You can work it out for yourself. He was a member of the Medical Council and he resigned over, let's call it the COVID phenomenon. All right, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. He's an Irish GP, and I'll read the blue text on the right is what's up there in the black in case it was too small. The barrister representing the Medical Council called me on Thursday, Dr. de Brun says. He said the council would like to make a deal if I sign an undertaking not to discuss the vaccine or nursing home deaths in public. They would be willing to drop the case. My public hearing is on June the 10th at Kingram House. That's the Medical Council, guys. Anyone who wants to go to it, please do so. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's the same thing again. I'm just going to read this with somebody's post about it. Dr. Marcus de Brun, an Irish GP who resigned from the Medical Council over nursing home deaths during COVID years and who is now under investigation, says he has received an offer to drop the case against him. If GP Dr. Marcus de Brun accepts the offer, he can avoid the Irish Medical Council fitness to practice hearing into his alleged serious misconduct due to take place next month. And in fact, of course, they're calling it serious misconduct. What it was good, moral, decent conduct. Yeah. All our institutions are infested and infected, guys, all of them. There's no such thing as a profession anymore. They've all been captured. Certain individuals remain ethical professionals, but no organization does. Yeah. In a post on X, the GP said the offer would require him to sign an undertaking not to discuss the vaccine and nursing home deaths in public. This blatantly shows what the Irish Medical Council's agenda is. It is not about ensuring that a proper health service is provided by our doctors, but it is about silencing and censoring the doctors who highlight the major faults of the Irish Medical Council and the Irish health system. I have huge respect for Dr. de Brun, as he has shown unbelievable courage, integrity, and absolute dedication to his profession. If possible, please support Dr. de Brun on the 10th of June at Kingram House. Mark your calendars, guys. It's in Dublin. I think it's Dublin 2. Okay. So that brings us, of course, now we're starting to run out of time again, as usual. Okay. That brings us to the reasoning for the People's Tribunal of Ireland, right? Basically, we've decided that we have to try and set up an alternative for people. At least we haven't got the enforcement. We don't have a police force. We don't have an army. We don't have courts. We don't have prisons. But at least in documented form, people can come to the People's Tribunal of Ireland and have a question answered to provide legal certainty or clarity. Do you understand, guys? If you think about it for a minute, most of us walk into the courts and we're sort of ambushed. We're not really expecting it. We're looking around, scratching our heads. What's going on? What did he say? What was that? I didn't hear that. What was that? What adjourned, or what just happened? You know, and you've paid through the nose for it. We've simplified the whole process so that by the time you walk into a court, ideally you do this before you go into one of the domestic courts. By the time you walk into the domestic court, you already have a finding or a determination. It's usually just a 1 to 4 page document about the question you've asked, or about your issue, or about, you know, you allege somebody's done something to you or something like that. And it's a proper process where both parties get invited to say their piece. And we just provide a document according to law that, on paper at least, cannot be challenged by the courts. So basically you're walking in and saying to the solicitors, barristers, and even the judge to a certain extent, oh, it's all right, guys, we sort of don't need you today. It's all been done. Here it is. It's in this determination. But by all means, you know, read it and see if you can find any fault with it. And they won't be able to, or they shouldn't be able to. And then, hopefully, you cut out all of this nonsensical, exploitative, disingenuous, devious fleecing of litigants by unscrupulous legal professionals. Yeah, they won't like it, of course, but anyway. So it's based. So the People's Tribunal of Ireland. There, I'll pull it up just for a second. Independence, impartiality, integrity, restoring the rule of law. Why? Because we don't have the rule of law in Ireland, and anyone who says that we do is either mistaken or is lying to you. We don't have the rule of law in Ireland. We've got a semblance of it, guys, but because most of our senior legal professionals, it's certainly in the agencies of the state, are willing to compromise themselves and defy the law when there's political agenda or some other agenda, we don't have it. And we've proved it many times over. So I won't go into it now. The second book on the right, Indictment and a Petition for a Public Inquiry into State-Sponsored Criminality in Ireland, and an explanation of why we need the People's Tribunal. Those two little booklets, those are foundation documents. So if, for example, some solicitors or were to try and challenge us, they would find themselves having to argue with these documents in the courts. And of course, when you think about it, if that's one of the documents containing the names and photographs of 40 criminal judges, you can imagine they're going to be a little bit hesitant to want to open up the evidence. But anyway, here, this is in the background there on the left is a 1-page version of a 4-page determination. This was the first one we did, guys. I'm conscious of the time here. This is it's explaining to the legal profession in particular the legitimacy of the People's Tribunal of Ireland and where its authority comes from. Now, I'll skip through this pretty quickly. If necessary, I'll do this again. But basically, this is the format. You see, there's the first one, okay? And I'll go a couple of interesting points to make. There's the 2 books. So it's based on these foundation documents, because the foundation documents prove that the domestic courts are largely corrupt and or incapable of properly administrating justice. And under those terms and conditions, the Constitution says we can actually set up our own tribunals. And interestingly here, according to the European Courts of Justice, right, the People's Tribunal of Ireland fits the criteria to be a competent domestic tribunal. Okay. Now, there will be arguments. People will be watching this, lawyers, and going, you can't do it. Statutory standing. Just wait a moment, guys. I'm going to do my best to explain this briefly, just this week, to give people the idea there's something going on here. This is unique and special, and we've managed to cut through a lot of the red tape and nonsense. Okay. So here we have in the Constitution, all right, Articles 37.1 and 40.6.1, all right, says that we can exercise limited functions and powers of a judicial nature in matters other than criminal matters, all right? Just bear with me, my friends, bear with me. Here are those two. So there, Article 37, it says, nothing in this Constitution shall operate to invalidate the exercise of limited functions and powers of a judicial nature in matters other than criminal matters, okay, not including criminal matters, okay, by any person or body of persons duly authorized by law to exercise such functions and powers, blah, 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 right. Notwithstanding that such person or such body of persons is not a judge or a court appointed or established, right? So very clearly, so what is this established by law or authorized by law? Well, what we did was we notified the government multiple times that we were setting up the tribunal in 2020. And if they had any objections, to let us know. We gave them all the paperwork, and because they refused to engage with us, they have tacitly consented. It's a thing called qui tacit consentit videtur, Latin. It means silence implies consent. And it's an active legal principle that is currently being used even up in the United Nations and the European Union. If guys aren't there to vote, often they are presumed to have voted in the affirmative because silence implies consent. They use it. So they use it, we use it, okay? The government are hiding. They won't, you can't get proper answers out of them, like I told you. So silence implies consent. So we're going ahead, we're setting up this tribunal. And then we had our first hearing on July the 1st, 2021 against a High Court judge, all right? So there's precedent here already. We've already done it once. This is the second time coming up now in a couple of weeks. So let's see, make this a little bit bigger. The second one now, this is really, really interesting. The Irish domestic law further provides for the establishment of the People's Tribunal of Ireland in alignment with the following articles of the Irish Constitution. So Article 46.1, the state guarantees liberty for the exercise of the following rights subject to public order and morality. 1, the right of the citizens to express freely their convictions and opinions. Okay, free speech. 2, the right of the citizens to assemble peaceably and without arms. PTI meetings. Yeah. And 3, the right of the citizens to form associations and unions. That's what it is. It's an association, the People's Tribunal of Ireland. It's an association of citizens, residents, people here in the state with good intentions. We're not doing anything unlawful at all. Nothing whatsoever. There's no argument against this. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. All right, the next one. This here, it says this is from our own determination. This is a fact. Any person, citizen or resident of the Irish state, including members of the People's Tribunal of Ireland, may avail of existing domestic laws to initiate and pursue common inform or criminal prosecutions as against any other person in the district court under Section 10 of the Petty Sessions Ireland Act 1851. Now, I've written this book about it, DIY Justice in Ireland, guys. Small little booklet, costs you about a tenner online or whatever, okay? This is where we have the authority to prosecute everyone. You don't even have to be in a tribunal. Every individual in the state. That's you, my friend, as you sit there scratching your head. Yes. Did you have to go to lawyers? No. Did you have to go to the guards? No. When, your neighbor stole the cow or your bicycle or you can go straight into a district court. You can prosecute the offender yourself if you can show a reasonable cause that they committed a crime. The judge will issue a summons. They have to come in. You deal with it. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy because they woke up to it, but it's a law. It's been enforced in law. There's been 4 Superior Court rulings that reinforce it, and that's basically what they threw me in jail for the first time, was to stop me going ahead prosecuting guards under this. And while I was in the prison, the case disappeared. Events overtook us, so to speak. So some of these things are still left hanging, drifting in the wind. But it's a great power. Hardly anybody has been using it, and you should be using it. But here we go now. I think this is the next couple of slides. How are we doing? Yeah, I think we might just get this all out. Right, friends. So, right. I Yes, under the terms of Article 38.1. Now, this is hugely interesting, my friends. I'm going to tell you something here that I can almost guarantee that almost none of you know about, okay? But it's hugely, hugely important, okay? Because you might say, all right, you're setting up this People's Tribunal. Where are you going to get your judges from? Okay, we don't call them judges. We call them adjudicators. Okay, I'll show you this Article 38.3 in a moment, you know? We qualify to be called a special or a specific court. All right. This is the people's. Why? Look at these. Now, these are quotes straight out of the Constitution, right? And this one's going to blow your mind, I think, friends. Okay. Right. Article 38.3.1, right? Special or specific courts may be established by law for the trial of offences, criminal offences mainly, by the way, in cases where it may be determined in accordance with such law that, the underlined part, the ordinary courts are inadequate to secure the effective administration of justice and the preservation of public peace and order, okay? And the Constitution powers jurisdiction and procedure of such special or specific courts shall be prescribed by law. Right, so first of all, they are using this justification to create the special criminal courts up at the CCJ that were usually used to deal with paramilitaries or drug gangs. Now, in those courts, there's no jury. This is against international law. And as you can see lower down there on the slide, those quotes, Ireland must abolish the non-jury special criminal court, says the United Nations. A relic of our troubled past. Time to abolish the special criminal courts. The problem with the special criminal courts, my friends, is that you've got 3 judges sitting in there, no jury. Often it's closed, it's in camera, you know, nobody sees or hears what's going on. Not always, but often. And whatever they decide, I mean, you know, and if you've been accused, for example, that guy is, let's say, in the IRA, or I believe that guy is a drug runner, that can sometimes be enough to haul you up on trial. And without a jury, my friends, we're in trouble, serious trouble. Anyway, so that's the interesting part. So if the People's Tribunal qualifies as a special court because, as it says there underlined, the domestic courts have shown themselves to be inadequate to secure the effective administration of justice. How do we know that? Because in the books we wrote, it proves it. Okay? How many scores of crimes being committed and fraudulent hearings. I mean, for God's sake, they closed one of my court cases down by putting an article in the Irish Times. The case never actually happened. The hearing never happened. But they posted an article in the Irish Times claiming it had. And then I found out that they hadn't even notified me, my case, and the judge wasn't even in the building that day. Guys, it's really unbelievable what they're getting away with. Yeah. Right, we've got to press on here. So there's that very interesting point. Now, here's the last point, which I think, again, is going to blow your mind. Believe it or not, we'll come back to that. Believe it or not, the last point is that there's another 2 clauses in the Constitution. I've forgotten the numbers of them now. It might be Articles 36 or whatever. Anyway, believe it or not, the special criminal courts, which have been outlawed by the United Nations, and I think Ireland has been fined millions every year for continuing to run them because it's undemocratic, okay? But they still keep doing it because it suits their interests, okay? These special criminal courts are exempted from the need to have qualified judges adjudicating them. There's 2 bodies in the Constitution that are exempted. Special or specific courts, so similar to us, the tribunal, and military tribunals, court-martials, because the army deals with that. They have army officers, right? So they're not qualified judges. Now, it just so happens, as far as we know, it is qualified judges that are staffing the special criminal courts. But according to the Constitution, they don't have to be. Now, isn't that interesting? So we use that rule to appoint lay adjudicators. They're people who, and believe it or not, the way they operate, I'll talk about that next week. It's not like a traditional court where you'll see 3 of the adjudicators sitting there and one guy gets up and argues another. Oh, none of all that nonsense is taken out of it. It's all about the core question and applying written positive law, which is already there in black and white for everyone to see, to answer the question put to the tribunal. Obviously, therefore, the questions have to be relatively straightforward, or the cases or the issues. If it's too complex, we simply won't deal with it because you're defeating the object, you know. The courts, the domestic courts, love complicated cases because they go on for years, yeah. And when they're not complicated, they often go on for years. And look at my own example. So this is how and why we've set up the People's Tribunal of Ireland. No, I haven't been drinking except for this little drop of orange juice here. So that's the website, and I'm encouraging people to go and have a quick look at it, friends. Next week, I'll talk a little bit more about the process that we intend to go ahead with on the 31st of May. There's already been an attempt, a semi-official attempt, to try and interfere in this, and maybe we can talk about that next weekend. We'll see. Depends how things unfold. But yes, here we are. So that's to encourage you to go on in and look at this and just click through the different things. The little stripy lines at the top of the page there on the website is the menu, you know, if you're looking for it, okay? We're now down to the last few slides, my friends. Yes. So this is now, I'm not telling you the location yet, guys. It's not exactly a state secret, but it's because there's only about 30 seats available. There's a handful left. If you definitely want to be there and get a seat, please contact me, all right? And we will then tell you the location to go to. Once the seats are full, we will be telling everybody where it is, because after the hearing, which should take about 40 minutes, after the hearing, we intend to have a sort of an ad hoc social meeting, presentation, whatever. It won't be, you know, in other words, a sort of mix and mingle and answer questions. We'll have some materials there with us, some books and flyers and stuff. So, yeah, it's going to double up. It is a public hearing in this event, and it will double up as a sort of a public meeting. And even, like I said, even members of the legal profession come along if you have questions, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Now, I'm only speaking on behalf of counsel, all right? I was the person who authored the first guidebook, so I probably know most about it. So I'm, you know, without sort of blowing my own trumpet, I'm probably the best person to answer questions. But there are other people involved, which, you know, they remain anonymous for the moment. There's no need to publicize who they are in case they get unwanted attentions from the state. Every week we've been saying who to listen to. Today we're featuring Dr. Vincent Carroll. Now, Vincent Carroll, he does a lot of short, concise videos. He's very articulate. He's very impassioned and a compassionate man, but he's very impassioned about what's happening in the country. Well worth a listen to. He's on a BitChute channel. He pops up in other places. Sovereign People is another website that's been doing good work. Also in alignment with remember the Hold the Line people, guys, you know, the yellow placards, those brave people standing out in the wind and the rain and the snow and the sunshine occasionally, trying to warn their fellow members of the public, their fellow citizens, of the dangers of listening to the authorities and complying. All right, so there's Vincent Carroll, guys. We'll try and do a different person every week to keep you going. Oh yes, 3 o'clock. We're almost out of time. 3 o'clock Irish time this Thursday, the 22nd. I'm being interviewed on a USA platform online. I'll put information up on in public forums when I get a little bit more details. And finally, there we are. That's our last slide. Those of you that want to find us now, obviously some channels are more active than others. Those are some of the books that we recommend that you get a hold of, particularly the one bottom right, Crisis Color Coup, and understand how evil, if you like, human evil has become industrialized and corporatized and governmentalized. God bless you all, guys. And I've just got a battery warning. Let's hope this goes quickly. God bless you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. There we go. There we go.